Okay, so this is our special topics on research ethics. This is Module 9 on deception and experiments. This is a timely topic because we just started talking about experimental design. Deception actually is a very common phenomenon in experimental design. So deception is not often used in surveys because once well, I don't say it's never used, but it's not very often used because most of the time survey research is rather straightforward, unless this particular survey study is designed to investigate some rather sensitive topic. But even in that case, my experience that there's no point of hiding the true purpose of that particular study. But experimental design is a totally different story because once you tell participants the kind of manipulation you use in this study, then this whole study is out of your control because you will then have no guarantee how the participant will answer the question, either in your desired way or in a way that's totally opposite to what you expect. For example, I can give you one example, and that is a study on the lighting condition in a room and how that affects participants' truth telling. You might have heard of this study if you have taken my nonverbal class. But anyway, so researchers created two rooms and they assign one group participant to a bright room and the other group of participants to a dim room. And their hypothesis is that participants in the dim room were more likely to lie. And so you can imagine easily if the researcher told truthfully all the participants what's going to happen in the experiment, then you might expect, whoever that's assigned to the dim room we're not going to be lying because, first of all the social desirability issue, right? So if you expect me to lie, then I don't think lying is a good behavior, then I will not lie, and that will totally jeopardize the purpose of the study. So in that case, deception is actually a critical aspect of the study design, and RB they typically recognize that fact, and as long as there's some safeguarding measures provided by the researcher, RB is going to prove that kind of deception. But anyway, so that's a quick illustration on why deception sometimes is necessary in experimental design. But the question, of course, as students of ethics is how can we really define or characterize this kind of deception, right? It's not like we're lying with data report, we're not lying with other aspects of study, but we're not telling the truth of our purpose of the study, or we're withholding some essential information about a study. Is that a lie? If it is a lie, or if it is deception, what kind of deception is that? And of course, if it is deception, well, it is, then what are some ethical considerations that we must be aware of when we design such manipulations and lies, or when we as RB reviewers, how do we approach or analyze the proposed deception or deceptive components of study? And of course, a big debate in the field is whether or not deception in research experiment in particular be allowed at all. So this is a rather big topic, but of course we're not going to go to full length on this topic. We're going to hit some essential points to give you some heads up and sort of appreciation of the complexity of this issue without bogging your mind. We're going to do this with two examples. The first one is a medical research the infamous Tuskegee syphilis study and the bystander apathy experiment, both of which happened in the United States. This particular Tuskegee syphilis, well, I should only say there's only one Tuskegee study, so this particular study took place between the year 1932 and 1972. It's actually conducted by the US government, a health department, and the goal is actually I should say, scientifically a good one, a well-justified one, because syphilis is still a lethal disease, and so that particular research team was charged with the task of finding out the natural progression of untreated syphilis. You can imagine from a medical and scientific perspective, the documentation of the natural progression of untreated syphilis is going to be valuable information for medical professionals to treat and to design drugs to counter syphilis. Because without knowing the natural progression of any disease, there's absolutely or almost no way of designing drugs to treat that disease. So you might say that this is actually a very good goal of the study, and perhaps for that particular reason, the study was initially approved by the U.S. government. But what the issue though is how they conducted the study. For whatever reason, the research team recruited or targeted 600 impoverished African American individuals. They carefully screened those research subjects so that they identified 201 of those people as controls, right? So those people were without the disease compared to the 399 individuals with the disease. So all subjects, SS, controls, and the targeted subjects, they were provided with free basic medical care. In the case they got a cold, they had fever, and they were provided with free meals, and they were provided with bureau insurance. So almost everything was taken care of for the subjects, with one critical exception. That is, all subjects were never informed of the availability of effective treatments of syphilis. So back then, there was already rather effective treatments of syphilis. But because researchers would like to document the natural progression of untreated syphilis, researchers decided to, and they did, hide that information from the subjects. And of course, none of the subjects actually received those treatments at the end of the study. So you can imagine that this is a highly controversial practice, to say the very least, that got the attention of many other medical professionals, and they questioned whether or not this kind of practice should ever be allowed in any kind of study, regardless who the subjects were. A second example of the use of deception in research is actually a social psychological study, but it's also rather controversial. This study aimed at determining how people respond to cruelty or accidents that happen in their presence. So how they did this is actually rather clever, I should say, scientifically. They used a stooge or a confederate, someone who worked with the researchers. So this particular confederate either appeared drunk or held a cane, and this person collapsed in a New York subway train. So the critical question is, would the public, without knowing who this person really was, would the public, other passengers in other ways on the train, would they help this person? So deception was used here because the fellow passengers were never informed about the purpose, first of all, of the study, and they did not know who this person really was. They thought this person genuinely was a weak or an elderly that might need help. Um, the reason that researchers decided to do this study is because there was a very tragic death of a kitty, Genovese. And Miss Genovese allegedly screamed for 30 minutes while being raped and killed at her home. Um, and despite, the screaming and other noises, no neighbors intervened or even called the police. So this particular incident got researchers interested and thinking, well, how can those neighbors, if they did know or did hear all the noises, how can they be so apathetic without any empathy or sympathy with the potential victim there? So that's why I designed the study to test in what condition would people really turn a blind eye to cruelty or accidents. Okay, so again, this is a highly controversial, perhaps not as highly controversial as the Tuskegee study, but still there's a big component of deception here. So our question is, how do we categorize those deceptions? And would those deceptive practices allowed in medical or social scientific studies? Okay, so we'll continue in the next part of this module.